have a talent that you wish you could turn into a career, such as a musician, author or actor? Perhaps you've been thinking of developing that creative hobby of yours into something more serious. If so, stay tuned. Welcome to Half Hour Mentor. My name is Ian Hewerdine, and welcome to the third series of my audio podcast designed to help anyone who is looking for inspiration to develop their creative skills, whether professionally or as a hobbyist. Just like Series 2, this one will focus on the various aspects of the creative arts. I shall be interviewing musicians, songwriters, authors and actors, but also speaking to some in the directing and strategic management fields of this wide-ranging industry. All of my guests have been carefully chosen, as each one of them has an interesting backstory from which we can all learn. Whilst there will be obvious direct benefit for anyone who wishes to pursue a career in the arts or just develop their creative skills, the interviews will be entertaining and of interest to a much wider audience. Some really interesting aspects of the arts and entertainment industry will be shared by my guests. There will be 10 guests in this series, with each episode being released on a Saturday morning. If you're new to the series, please follow it on whichever streaming platform you use and go back to have a listen to the rich archive of interviews. This series is completely independent and ad-free, so if you like what you hear and you'd like to help cover some of the production costs, say coffee and biscuits, please feel free to donate what you can via the Corona Sound website. A link can be found in the show notes. And so to my guest for today, Boo Hewerdine. Described by the BBC as one of Britain's most consistently accomplished songwriters, he has forged a hugely successful career as a songwriter, producer and mentor. He's a long-time collaborator with the fabulous Eddie Reader, providing her with the top 40 smash Patience of Angels in 1994. He's also a regular member of her live touring band. In terms of songwriting and producing, it's probably easier to list artists that he hasn't worked with, to be honest, but a few notable luminaries include Chris Difford from Squeeze, Clive Gregson, The Cause and Natalie Imbruglia. His first rise to fame was with his band The Bible back in the 1980s. In fact, I remember watching them on Terry Wogan's show back in the day and going out and buying the album the following weekend. Since then, alongside working with Eddie, he's forged a successful solo career around all his songwriting and production duties. Since then, alongside working with Eddie, he has forged a successful solo career around all of his songwriting and production duties for others. He also runs regular songwriting workshops around the UK, inspiring others to find their creative voice through song, and you'll hear some of his invaluable tips in this interview. If you're not familiar with the variety of Boo's work, I've curated an hour-long Spotify playlist of both his solo recordings and his songs performed by others. The link can be found in the show notes. I met up with Boo in his Glasgow music room to chat about his early musical influences, the art of songwriting and his various collaborations. Let's have a listen. Boo Hewerdine, welcome to Half Hour Mentor.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much. First question.
Yes.
I always ask every one of my guests is, what was the first job you wanted to do back in your teenage years?
Well, it's before then. I remember everyone had to say what they wanted to be in class, or at 8 years old or something, and everyone wanted to be a fireman in an astronaut. And I said comedian, and I didn't even know what a comedian was. But that hasn't worked out. But I do like the Bob Monkhouse joke who said when I was young, I said I wanted to be a comedian and they all laughed at me. Well, they're not laughing now. So, but that was what I wanted to do. But at the same time, I'd begun to make up songs in my head. I didn't pick up a guitar till I was 18 or 19, but I was making up songs before then and singing them to local groups in the hope that they would sing them, and they did.
Right. Who were your musical influences?
Oh, everybody. I would say everything but prog, I guess, because at school all my classmates liked prog, and I remember I had the This Is Soul album, and I brought that into school and they all laughed at me, and they're not laughing now. So I think I win, and I hope they're very happy with their Badger albums and so forth. But so I liked soul music, I really did, and classic songwriting, and then punk. I loved that. And I remember an album before punk came out, which was Down by the Jetty. Was another guy brought that in, a Dr. Feelgood record. And that was pretty life-changing for me, because there were no wizards.
Or capes.
Or capes, yes, indeed.
Oh,
yeah.
So what made you choose music as a profession then, and at what stage was that?
I don't think I chose it particularly. I was not particularly... I knew that I wanted to make up songs, but it took me quite a long time to be a musical person. I've only started liking my voice in the last few years, but I've always wanted to write songs. So I think I've stumbled into it, really. I don't strictly think I'm employable as such. The few jobs that I did have never ended very well. I worked in a record shop at the same time as we got our first deal with the Bible, which was interesting. And my job was to push around trolleys with a headset on, and people would say, "Can I have 4 Paul Youngs?" and stuff like that. It's for a chain called Andy's. And then we put out our first album, Walking the Ghost. There it is, still
excellent,
still sells amazingly. And then I started getting rung up by record companies. And at first, the first company I got rung up by was Sony. And so I'm pushing the trolley, and I'm really nervous because on that album we used a sample of Mahalia Jackson without asking for permission. So I thought I was about to be sued, but they said, "We'd like to offer you a deal." And that was strange. Then at about the same time we met Marcus Russell, who was a manager who had bought that record and liked it, and we were so lucky to meet him. He went on to manage people like Oasis and stuff like that. A wonderful, wonderful man. Mm-hmm. And he sorted out a big record deal for us. So, what I do remember is that there was champagne at the signing, but they were in styrofoam cups, and I thought, there's something about this that feels strange.
Because you with the next album, with the Bible, you went on to work with Steve Earle as well.
It was Steve Earle, yeah. I'm still huge influence on my life, particularly in terms of production. The way he produced was really interesting. It was much more sort of broad sweep than some of the other people that I met. But there are 3 producers that have really affected me. One is a man called John Kelly, who I still do things with, who used to work with Paul McCartney and stuff like that. And he taught me patience. He's brilliant, letting ideas come. And there was John Wood, who did the Nick Drake albums, who's still working as well. And he just made me think a bit differently about sound, and Steve O about how important that the feeling in the studio is the main thing. You know, you can have a wonky sounding drum kit, but if people aren't putting themselves into it, it's not going to be great, you know. So you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. I'm not sure that's helpful, but there you go.
That's all, and on that note, that's all we need. You heard it here first on Half Hour Mentor, folks. Yeah. But moving on to your songwriting, so obviously that was a key part when you were working in the band, and obviously very prolific.
Yeah.
That is it. About over 2,000 songs now that you've got published?
I don't know. It might be that many. I know there's a thing where you can look and it only goes up to 1,000, and then it goes up to the M's or something. So probably of those 2,000, there's probably at least 3 or 4 that are okay. So I mean, it's so instinctive to me now. It's how I think almost. So today I've been listening to the songs that I wrote with Chris Difford. He's doing some recording down there, and there were little tweaks that I thought might help. I've definitely put my 10,000 hours into it. It's my philosophy when I do my workshops is that everybody has ideas, everybody has things they want to say. I just try and accelerate the process for them by showing them some things that I've learned through hard graft, and it really, I love it. It really works. I really like watching people start producing music that they like, you know.
Well, I wanted to ask you a bit more in detail about the approach to songwriting then.
Yeah.
So, what's your methodology? Do you sit down sort of 9 to 5? Do you just write when inspiration strikes? How do you plan it?
If somebody asks me to write something, I'll sit down and write it, definitely. And I've got 3 to write over the next week for people who've asked me to, and I that's great. That's easy. Someone asks you to do something, you do it. For myself, I have no method at all, and I have ideas, and they're on scraps of paper, and I find it very difficult to apply the discipline that I urge on other people to myself. Every time I finish an album, I think, oh, I don't have to do that again. And oh no, I've started having ideas.
So which do you prefer, writing for others or writing for yourself?
Probably writing for myself, despite the fact I'm moaning. But it's so brilliant to be asked to write for someone else. It's so flattering. And I've had some real adventures, and all my friends are songwriters or singers, so it's like, it's been a fantastic social thing as well. And I don't underestimate that. With the workshops, they all stay in touch with each other and sometimes go on holiday without me, which was quite shocking when I found that how I managed to read an email that I wasn't meant to read. I said, what? You've all gone on holiday? And I think songwriting is quite a lonesome pursuit, but so I've really enjoyed watching these communities spring up. And one of the things I do as well, I have a real faith in people writing for the sake of writing rather than necessarily trying to have commercial success. And I do stuff for a thing called Talent is Timeless, which is this young woman, Saskia Griffiths-Moore, started for people over 50 to write songs. And I did a weekend with people last weekend, and it was so brilliant, because the only expectation is to write something great, not to sort of necessarily have a hit, who knows, but just the joy of creation and stuff like that.
Something that's meaningful that they can...
I think every song... I like the idea of songs having use outside of just being commercial as well. So even if it's someone writing for their anniversary or something, it's a good thing being a songwriter is I went to my friend Vlado Nozel. He is a young guy, half my age, but we write together. I got married in Bratislava 2 weekends ago, and my wedding present to him was a song, and everyone was like, oh, that's so good, it saved me loads of money. And but just to put that together and for it to be heard once in that environment and for it to mean something to them, which they said it did. But that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I get, I really, as I've done this more and more, I'm very lucky that I've made a living with music. But that's not the holy grail. I think it's sort of somebody being moved or touched or enjoying it, you know. So
what comes first, music or lyrics?
The concept, I think. Sometimes it's music, but more often than not, there'll be some sort of concept that will rattle around in my brain sometimes for ages. And then when I encourage people to co-write, I encourage them to talk to each other for at least an hour or 45 minutes before they pick up an instrument or even talk about the song, because they will naturally hone in on some sort of concept together, and then it feels very powerful. And there are 3 people in the room, the 2 people and the song. When you're by yourself, that conversation can sometimes go on for minutes or years, so there are some things that have been rattling around in my head for years. But I would say the idea first and foremost, and then it can sometimes come in an unseemly rush, or I can spend a week on one line. All of those things aren't true when you're writing for someone else. You just have to deliver by the given date. So the problem with writing for yourself is that there's nobody saying, I want it on my desk by Monday.
So that approach of writing for others then, it sounds like deadline is something that you treasure.
Oh, it's amazing. And when I do the workshops and give people 2 hours or something to come up with something, and they do, and then they go, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Of course we could. Deadlines are magic. They really are. I think deadline... 2 things that are missing from a lot of creative work these days, particularly is songs, is deadlines and also commission. So nearly all great art that you see around you in any city, all of it was commissioned, and for some reason that's fallen away from the process. And so when I do get commissioned, like I sometimes write for The Verb on Radio 3, it's a real thrill, and I've normally got like 48 hours to come up with something, and I have to be aware of the context of the programme and all that. It's like a gift, being asked to do something.
Do they give you the concept that they want and then you write? They
will say, for example, one of my favourite songs was during lockdown, and they wanted me to write a song about lockdown. I thought, oh my gosh, that's a hard one. And I said, right, I'm not going to... The words Netflix are not going to appear in my song. Or the word Netflix is one word.
It's one word, yeah.
Yes. Can you edit that out? Because I sounded like an idiot. Oh my God. I didn't really think Netflix was too... I was thinking on my feet, Ian. I panicked. But those sort of words were all alone and all that. So I tried to... What I did was, I thought, well, what else can I say? And it really struck me during lockdown that we all learned new ways to tell each other that we cared about each other. And human beings are really quick with new protocol of forms of communication. Like, we all know text etiquette now. We all knew email etiquette right away. So we all learnt new etiquettes of speaking to each other. Quite a lot of it was shouting "you're on mute," but still. So I just tried to write a song about the way that we communicate with each other, and it's called "The Language of Love," and it's changing, you know. And it was good because it made Ian, the presenter, cry, and that's a win for me if I make someone cry.
Yeah, because you did a lot of collaboration on Zoom and things with musicians as well, didn't you, during lockdown?
I did, yeah.
Stuck in our
Lady Nade, for example, who was on Loose Ends on Saturday and played one of our songs, which was bizarre because I had her in one ear and I had Chris in another ear because they were doing a take. That was a strange moment. And so is Lady Nade. Vlado, who I talked about, Vlado Nosal, we've got a duo called Hotel Art, and right now we're the third most played song in Slovakia, which I'm really excited about. So we're just releasing singles over there until we've got the album together. It's called Hotel Art because I'm really fascinated by mass-produced art. I don't know, you must have sat in hotels many times and looked up and gone, what were they thinking?
The triptych of,
yes.
of London Bridge.
The triptych of Daub. Yeah. What's going on here? And so it's sort of all the songs we write are sort of a reflection on mass-produced art, which sounds a bit up itself, but it's really fun. We have a tremendous laugh doing that.
That's good.
And then there was a lovely man called Brian Johnson, who I wrote probably my favourite song of the last few years, which is The Night Is Young. And we write, whenever we meet, we write songs about Vivian Mayer. There's a Vivian Mayer book, who's the photographer, the street photographer whose work was only found after she died. Nice. So each person that I would visit or meet with, Adam Holmes wrote a whole album with him, would be we'd have that each one would be a little different universe, which I find really handy for when you're writing. So it's like, I'm with Brian today, a bit of look at some Vivian and stuff like that.
So when you do a collaborative album like that, for example, does it always have a theme to it?
No, not always, but I found that working within a theme, whether it be lyrically or musically, gives you like a real creative injection, because if you naturally fight against the little rules that you made for yourself. The first time I did that was a lovely woman called Hafdís Holt, who's in Iceland, very wonderful singer, and she asked me and Neil, actually, who's doing Chris, to produce her. And she'd had a big hit on a dance hit, and she'd signed a big deal with BMG, and she didn't want to do that. So she said, I want to make an album with you of your songs that we've written together. Wow. But I just want to use children's toys as the instruments. And I have a budget of 4p. So it was made in Neil's spare room. And it was one of the most enjoyable creative experiences I've ever had, because we were like, this is what we have. What are we going to do? I'm still very, very fond of that record. If you're writing a play or a book or a film, you have parameters. But if you're writing an album and you don't have parameters, it becomes this rather daunting canvas. And it's not the canvas that makes the painting, it's what goes on the canvas. So if you give yourself limitations, it doesn't limit you in terms of expression. In fact, I find it exciting and
gives you a bit of a focus.
Down, but you still end up writing a broad range of things musically or subject-wise. So I did one record where it was all based around an instrument called a dulcitone, which used to be made in Glasgow here about 100 years ago or more, which were very, very quiet percussive keyboards that were made so people in tenements like we are now could hold church services without disturbing their neighbours. I love the sound of it. We ended up having two and a third one to hand as well, and there's no guitar on the album at all. again, it's one of my favourite things, just because it was like a challenge.
Yeah, just different. And
yeah.
setting yourself out.
Yeah.
Do you ever get writer's block?
Oh yeah, I do.
How do you overcome it?
Yeah, somebody asked me to write something because I can't say I've got writer's block then, but for myself, yeah. But not say with Chris. Difford there, he sends me a lyric and I send him back a song, normally within the day, and right up to last minute before he went into recording, he was sending me lyrics, and I think they might be my two favourite on just from listening. There's one in particular which is really quite strange chord sequence, I guess, and then just hearing these really good people playing it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's good. But I don't spend a lot of time with that, because I feel my job is to react to the lyric in a very honest way, rather than sort of agonise over everything. It's just like, what is this telling me? And I end up doing these things that I wouldn't do for myself. So no, if other people involved, I don't get a writer's block just by myself.
You mentioned earlier about working at the songwriting workshops that you did, and working with people and helping them create various things. What do you find the biggest challenge for songwriters in those type of workshops, people who come along to learn? What's the biggest challenge?
I'll tell you how I started with them. First off, I was playing a gig in Glasgow way before I lived here, and some Danish people came up and said, would you come to Denmark and help us with some workshops? And I didn't even know what those were or what that even meant. And I went over to an island called Samso for 4 years running, and it was like a crash course in doing it. And it occurred to me pretty early on, and it's really useful today, for example, is that where people need help is in getting a really firm grip on form and structure. That's all it is. So I give really very simple exercises that involve form and structure, and suddenly these beautiful things emerge, because I think songwriters or people writing songs get a bit involved in concepts for arrangement before they've written the song. I've got a songwriting friend who's written loads of number one singles, and if I go and write with him, he's a fantastic engineer. It's called Phil Thornalley. But we would never write to the gear, we'd always write away from the gear, and if it sounded good with the two of us, then we'd go over to the gear. And he's amazing. He can make anything sound amazing. And I've noticed that when people are writing and they're saying to me, we could have horns here, or blah, blah, blah. That's brilliant, but that's not the song. Yeah,
it's the next stage.
That's the next stage, because a song is indestructible. Like My Way, done by the Sex Pistols or Frank Sinatra, they're the same song. Yeah. And as soon as you get a sort of concept that a song and arrangement aren't necessarily the same thing, sometimes they are with some musics, but it's really liberating. And so you're concentrating on making sure the words fall right, the melody works well. So I give them just little things. At no point do I say, this is how you write songs. I just say, why don't you try doing this and see if you like it? Or I tell them things that I've noticed, that's all.
Can you give me one example of an exercise you might set? Because there's bound to be people listening now who think, actually, I'd like to go on one of those workshops.
Well, one that you can do is you can write 3 verses in limerick form. So you can just clock what a limerick does, and then try and write it away from your instrument and just write those 3 verses. And in that, try and move through time. So there's simple, have a beginning, middle and end of some sort of story. And then if you have one line, which is the last line of each limerick form, can be the title. And then the trick is to come up with a title that means something slightly different in each verse because of the information you put around it. Right. It's not difficult, but I've had some mind-blowing results doing things like that. Right. Doing things with melody. Most songs these days, and it's fine, are written harmony first, melody second. So you get, even in this industry, people called top-line writers, who you get given tracks and they come up with melodies. But what happens with that is you're immediately trapped in a little harmonic prison, which is fine, and most brilliant records done that way. So I will suggest that they come up with melody first and then harmonise it. Again, some mind-blowing results, because when we're playing guitar, we'll think we have to change chord every 2 bars. Somebody sings a beautiful melody, you go and work it out. Oh, that's just 1 chord for 6 bars, you know? Yeah. So things like that. So I just try and add to the toolbox rather than replace, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. The other great thing about doing that is that you can be writing songs away from your instrument, either lyrically or melodically. So many people, when they come on workshops, go, I say I'm not a very good guitar player or something. It matters not a jot. Neil's dad was Ewan McCall, didn't play an instrument at all. That's got nothing to do with writing songs. That's arranging, So Ewan McCall would sing songs and then Peggy would arrange them, but they could be arranged in a myriad number of ways. Their version of First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, bears no resemblance at all to the beautiful Roberta Flack version. Same song though, So, yeah.
In the workshops then, so you've given some ideas, and that must be a fantastic feeling for those people who perhaps have had writer's block, or they must have come on it because they wanted help for some reason. What's the feeling, what's the buzz like at the end of those workshops?
Well, it depends on the length of the workshop, really. So we had a really lovely time over 2 days, but previous to that, 2 weeks before that, I'm doing this longer course where we're going to be recording, and they're going to have interviews with industry people, blah blah blah, a gig in Inverness at the end of it, and the idea is that by the end of it they'll have all the information they need to put out their own records,
Right, so it's not just songwriting, it's about
it's a longer. That's a longer one. But at the end of the week we started with the songwriting week. At the end of the week, and we had a concert where people were playing the material which some of us had heard being created, and they'd had a whole week to work on them. It's incredibly emotional night. So sometimes I will record, get an engineer, really good engineer, like world-class type engineer in to record what we've done, and then we have a playback party. Nothing beats it. It's incredible, because you're hearing these songs that you're all really familiar with, and if I heard them now I'd know them, but at the beginning of the week nothing, we just had air. So it's a really beautiful sort of journey, and I feel lucky that I've done it so many times now that it's just it's like husbandry, really, just sort of.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge with workshops is just making sure that everybody feels heard. That's it. That's
Yeah.
Make sure if someone's a bit quieter that they're not passed over, or if someone's. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I love, and always happens if you're sort of empathetic, is this brilliant support system grows up where they're all looking out for each other. I love it. It's beautiful.
That's fantastic. You mentioned a lot of the collaborations that you've done within that. Do you class yourself as a mentor officially, would you say?
Well, I occasionally get paid as a mentor, and I did particularly during lockdown. The way I think about my life is I have 5 strands, which is my stuff, my solo stuff, working with Eddie and other people as a guitar player, writing, producing, and the workshops / mentoring. So I feel I have these 5 things I'm juggling all the time.
Right. Out of all of those, which do you most enjoy?
I like all of them. I wouldn't do them. I like all of them at various points. I have to say that I've only done 1 solo gig, I think, this year. I've done loads of gigs, and loads with some of my really good friends, and I've loved it, but I did 1 and then I'd forgotten. That's probably because I'm a show-off. I just had the best night. It was in Penarth in Wales, on the pier. Beautiful audience, so I just felt really lifted by that. But 2 gigs in, I'd start going, when am I doing my next workshop? So I don't know. They're all good. I wouldn't do them. I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky, because I realised early on that unless I diversified I wouldn't be able to survive, because it's very hard making a living doing music. So I'm trying to be busy all the time,
Yeah.
So.
If I've got a listener there who thinks, I really like the idea of a songwriting workshop, I need to save up for it or whatever, can you give them 3 simple tips just to help them get off the ground with the songwriting?
Oh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? So the biggest problem, I think, when people write is they get in the way of themselves.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I shall tell you. I shall come to this forthwith. It's like I see new songwriters, they'll go, I was looking out the window, and they go, well, the window should be window, should it be door? Should it be, what sort of door? Like, just let it happen, and then go back and fix it. And that, I think, of trusting yourself and getting in the way of yourself is a huge problem for a lot of songwriters. And they'll say, should it be the door or a door? It really doesn't matter. The important bit is that you're looking at a space or something. That's, think big, and then so do drafts. So your first draft could be a load of blah, and half of it could just be you going blah 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 blah. people think they have to finish the song in a one-act. You don't get that with any other form of writing. You know, if any of these books we're looking at here, which obviously people at home cannot see, but there are books here, they would be 8th, 9th, 10th drafts, you know. So don't be afraid to just blast something out that sounds like it is a song, and then go back and tinker with it, because then you'll have something to work with. So I think that's almost always, when I'm working with people who haven't written much, is that they're very self-critical, and that's what I mean by getting in the way of themselves, and they write linearly. They write line 1 and then they think, what's line 2? I don't do that. I envisage a finished song and I populate it with lyrics, if that makes sense. I'd think, this feels like, I think I can say this in 3 verses, and maybe there'll be a bridge. So the architecture exists, and then I just populate it, and that works very, very well if you're writing quickly with other people as well. One of my favourite records I ever wrote was with Pete Wilson, who's called Duke Special, and we wrote a song called Under the Dark Cloth, which is all songs about photography as an art form. Its 100th anniversary, and we wrote it. He lives in Belfast. I don't. So we just visited and did it in little scraps of time. So it's really handy thinking about this is a minor song. It's going to be in 3/4. And it's going to peak around here. So like a total sketch, you know, and then fill it in. Really thrilling, because he had done some work for RTE in Ireland, and rather than take payment, he said, "Can I borrow your orchestra, a 48-piece orchestra, for 2 days in the studio?" So to hear our tiny little scratchy things recorded on phones, but layering back at me in particular, because Pete was performing them, sitting in that studio in Dublin, it's
wow.
Incredible moment. And then, much to his delight, they liked it so much he was asked to go to the Met in New York and perform it. Unfortunately, I couldn't go with him because I was doing a couple of gigs with Chris Difford there, and I was in a pub in Cheshire where the fruit machine was louder than the PA. So our experiences sort of diverged.
So in terms of tips, it's, I think, what we're pulling from that is have a framework, work on a framework, but then just let it go, see what comes,
just see what
redraft
comes.
it.
Yeah, just see what comes. I don't sort of, that sounds a bit like something other song. I never really stopped Bob Dylan, did it? No. So it's like I don't think that matters. As long as you don't feel that awful feeling that you're stealing, or that there is something else. It drives me mad. Sometimes I'll be writing something on an acoustic guitar and they say, "Yeah, it sounds a bit country." I like the word that. What do you mean by that? Yeah. It means I'm playing an acoustic guitar, but I could be playing Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Would you say that's a bit? Yeah, it's a bit country, that. Yeah. So just keep the song in your head as well. Yeah. Don't let it be particularly attached to the instrument that you're writing with.
Yeah. Well, that's been a fascinating insight.
Is it okay?
Yeah, that's great. I've got one final question to ask all of my guests, and that's, knowing what you know now, with all of that you've learned over the years, what one piece of advice would you give that younger self of you?
I would have been a bit more confident, and I was there. I was through the door. I was in the room. I had all the opportunities and stuff, and I tended to listen to people's advice a bit too much and wasn't bold and pushy enough, because I've got to here now and I love where I am, but I do realise that if I'd been a bit more bolshy and stuff, then I'd have had a different journey, which might have involved a slightly larger sofa in a bigger room, but that's it.
Hewerdine, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll agree that if you're a songwriter like me, there are so many tips in that interview that you'll probably want to go back, have another listen and take some notes. I found it interesting that a deadline was probably the most powerful driver to help him finish a song. It's something that's a key driver in any walk of life when we think about it, but it's worth thinking how you can set a deadline for yourself in order to help you get creative. Also, the point about just writing and not being critical as you get the ideas. I'd never thought of it in the context of an author before, when you think that they'll go through several drafts before they get to the final publication. It's exactly the same with a song when you do think about it. That was really helpful. Incidentally, there's some great tips for budding authors coming up later in the series, so stay tuned. My thanks to Boo for his time and mentorship during such a busy time. Don't forget, you can immerse yourself in his fabulous songs straight after this episode by following the link to the Spotify playlist I've created featuring some of his work. You can also find out more information about his songwriting and performance workshops. All the links are in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow the series wherever you get your pods and do review the back catalogue if you're new to the series. You can leave feedback about the episode through social media by searching for Half Hour Mentor or via the email link in the show notes. I'd love to know what you think of these episodes, so please do get in touch. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, bye for now.